A scout crests a ridge at first light and stops dead. Below him spreads a land that no human eye has ever hunted, grass to the horizon, thick with game that has never once learned to fear a man. A whole continent waiting on the far side of the world's edge. Everything in him wants to walk down into it, and then, out on that grass, something enormous lifts its head. Something already lives here, something already owns it. For years, real scientists genuinely wondered whether a single monstrous animal helped hold humanity out of the Americas for thousands of years. One bear, one gate, one whole hemisphere kept shut. But the truth, when we finally dug it up, turned out to be stranger than the legend, and in its own quiet way, far more haunting than any monster could ever be. To understand the fear, you first have to understand the door. For tens of thousands of years, an ice age world locked so much of the planet's water into glaciers that the sea level fell and bared a bridge of dry land. We call it Beringia, a cold, grassy, treeless plain that joined the old world to the new, where Siberia reached across to Alaska. On the near side lay the world that humans already knew, hunted, mapped in memory, crowded with familiar dangers and familiar prey. On the far side lay a continent that no human being had ever set foot upon, an entire hemisphere of grass and forest and river holding its breath. It was rich beyond anything they could imagine, and utterly, completely unknown. And the scouts who first edged east into it were the first of the first, the tip of a spear that had been thrown across the whole of the old world. Behind them stretched 100,000 years of human wandering, out of Africa, across Asia, up into the frozen north, and now at last to the final coast, where there was one more crossing left to make and no one yet who had made it. Inu is one of them, pushing along the ragged edge of the Mammoth Steppe, farther east than anyone he has ever known has gone. Behind him lies the known world with all its hardship and all its comfort. Ahead lies silence and endless grass and the growing, prickling sense of something watching him from within it. Because the land ahead is not empty of danger, far from it. It is full of giants, great cats, dire wolves, and something larger and stranger than all of them. The Ice Age Americas were guarded by megafauna that had never once been humbled by a human hand, that had no ancestral memory of what a coordinated spear-throwing ape could do. And into that idea, science would one day place one particular animal, an animal that would grow in our imagination far past its real size, Arctodus simus, the giant short-faced bear. The creature some believed stood at the very door of a hemisphere and dared us to enter. Let the legend stand up to its full height for a moment, because it truly earned that height. Reared up on its hind legs, Arctodus reached something like 3.5 meters or more, over 11 feet of bear, towering above any man who ever lived. And even on all fours, the old stories say, it could look a standing grown man level in the eye. It did not look like the heavy, shuffling bears you know. It had long legs, built lean and tall, more like something made for striding across open country than for shambling through a forest. And here is the part that gives the legend real teeth. Its bones carry a chemistry that reads like a killer's. When scientists measured the nitrogen locked in the bones of Beringian Arctodus, the numbers came back among the most carnivorous of any bear ever tested, overlapping astonishingly with lions. Bone chemistry does not lie about diet. Whatever this northern giant was eating, it was eating a great deal of meat, far more than the berry and honey bears of our imagination. So the picture that formed in our minds was terrible and simple and gripping. A long-legged, lion-fierce giant, patrolling the single narrow entrance to an entire new world, and around that picture grew a real, sighted scientific idea, one with a name. The gauntlet. The gauntlet hypothesis proposed that the new world was so thick with unafraid, oversized predators that early humans simply could not walk in and survive. That the megafauna themselves formed a living wall of teeth and claws, and that Arctodus was its gatekeeper, the largest and boldest of them all. In this telling, humanity stalled for age after age at the very threshold of a new world, held back not by the ice and not by the distance, but by the animals. It is the kind of idea that lodges in the mind and will not leave nature herself posting a sentry at the last door on Earth. It is a real idea, and you can feel exactly why it gripped people so hard. A single beast, tall as a legend, guarding a hemisphere against all comers. It is almost too good a story, clean, symmetrical, cinematic, the kind of tale that feels true precisely because it is so satisfying to tell. And that, it will turn out, is precisely the problem with it. The best stories and the truest ones are not always the same story, and the difference between them is where honest history begins. Inu does not know the gauntlet as a theory, of course. He knows it only as a feeling low in his gut, a wrongness he cannot name. The land ahead is too rich, too quiet, too utterly unhunted. The animals here do not run from him, and that, strangely, is its own kind of terror. A horse lifts its head, regards him with mild curiosity, and goes back to grazing, because nothing in its whole line has ever been killed by a creature that looks like this. Back home, prey scatters at the first human scent. That fear is a kind of relationship, a long conversation between hunter and hunted written over thousands of years. Here there is no such conversation, and the silence of it makes the whole rich land feel subtly wrong. He pushes east anyway, because pushing east is what a scout is for. Every single step takes him deeper into a country that has never known a human footprint and has never learned to grant one any room. He finds the sign of the owner long before he finds the owner itself. A track sunk deep into the soft ground beside a game trail, wider across than his own chest. He crouches over it, and the claw marks alone are longer than his fingers, gouged into the earth like the teeth of a rake. Whatever made this is not a thing he can fight, and every instinct he owns tells him so at once. A spear is made for a horse, a deer, a man, not for something whose footprint swallows a hand. Then across a shallow rise he finally sees it, and the sight stops him cold. It stands over a dead animal, a kill, or a carcass it has simply claimed as its own, and everything about it is wrong in scale, too large for the world around it. The other scavengers, the wolves and the smaller cats, keep their careful distance from it, and so, instantly and without thinking, does Anu. This is the exact moment the whole legend was built to explain. A human at the edge of a new world, stopped in his tracks by a guardian too vast to fight and too calm to fear him. The bear does not charge, it does not need to. It simply is, and its being there is enough to say to a whole species, not yet. And Anu, one small man at the edge of everything, hears that message and believes it. So they meet, not in a chase, but in a standoff, which is somehow worse. The bear stands over the carcass, and Anu stands frozen where he stopped, and the empty space between them holds the whole of the argument. It does not run at him, it has no earthly reason to. Speed is not this animal's weapon. Its weapon is that it is simply too large to be argued with, a wall of muscle and bone that no single spear in Anu's hand could ever settle in one throw, and the menace of it lives entirely in the stillness. A charging predator, at least, you can read and react to. A still one, watching, patient, tells you nothing at all about what it will do next. The bear has all the time in the world, and it knows it. The bear regards him with a flat, bottomless patience, the patience of a creature that has never once in its life lost a carcass to anything that walks or flies. And Anu understands in his bones that this animal does not see him as a threat at all. It sees him, if it sees him as anything, as a small and foolish thing that might, unwisely, want its food. And there is a strange humility in that, to be so thoroughly not a threat that the most dangerous animal on the continent will not even trouble to rise. So he does the only wise thing there is to do. He yields the ground, not in defeat exactly, more in plain recognition of the truth. The carcass is the bear's, the plain around it is the bear's. For now, in this moment, the whole new world feels like it belongs to the bear, and this is precisely where the legend hardens into certainty in our minds. A creature this enormous, this calm, this completely unbothered by a grown man with a spear, of course it guarded a continent. Of course humanity waited, generation after generation, trembling at the threshold, while giants like this one own the far grass. It is a clean, satisfying, frightening story. Now watch the patient work of science take it very carefully apart. Here is where the truth turns on the legend and begins quietly to shrink it. When scientists looked hard at Arctodus, at its actual body, its dates, its most likely way of making a living, the terrifying guardian started to come apart in their hands. Start with the shape of it. One influential study argued almost bluntly that the fearsome, long-legged, coursing predator of the legend was largely an invention, the predaceous bear, in the author's own memorable words, that never was. Those long legs were most likely not built for running prey down at all. They were probably built for covering enormous distances cheaply, for roaming a vast home range in an endless economical search for food. Not a sprinter, a wanderer. The same long legs that made the legend so frightening turn out to argue against it. They are the legs of a traveler, not a hunter that runs its prey to the ground. And that carnivorous chemistry, the nitrogen that reads like a lion's, it fits a very different story just as neatly as it fits a killer. The most likely way this giant actually ate was not by hunting down its own prey, it was by bullying. Kleptoparasitism, the scientists call it. using sheer overwhelming size to shove other, smaller predators off the kills they worked hard to make, and simply stealing the meat. It is a strategy that fits the body perfectly. You do not need to be fast to steal a carcass, you only need to be too big to argue with, and Arctodus was exactly that. A scavenging giant, not a coursing slayer. Its terrible size was a threat aimed mostly at other carnivores, not a tool for chasing down a man. Then comes the single fact that breaks the gauntlet apart entirely. The timing does not work. The last securely dated Arctodus in the north appears to come before the confirmed arrival of humans in the region. The bear was already gone, or fast going, by the time people truly came through. And a guardian cannot possibly hold a door it is no longer standing at. The monster that supposedly kept us out had, in the end, left its post before we ever reached it. The legend was smaller than we made it and gone sooner than we feared. We should be fair to the idea, though. The gauntlet was a serious, cited hypothesis, argued in good faith, and it is only through more digging, more dating, and more careful chemistry that it has been answered. That is science working exactly as it should, and there is no shame in a good idea that the evidence outgrows. And strangely, unsettlingly, what replaces it is the more haunting answer of the two. Because if the bear did not stop us, then what did? The honest answer is far bigger and far stranger than any single animal at a gate. It is worth sitting with because it says something true about us. Ice held us. For long, brutal ages, sheer walls of glacier sealed the route south, and no gauntlet of teeth was needed where there was simply a mile-thick wall of ice. The great ice sheets did not need to be defended. They simply were, cold and blank and impassable, closing the road for tens of thousands of years at a stretch. Distance held us to a journey so vast that whole generations could be born, live, and die somewhere in the middle of the crossing, never seeing either end. Beringia itself was not a bridge you dashed across in a season. It was a homeland in its own right, a cold country where people may have lived for thousands of years before ever pressing on into the continent beyond. And something harder to name held us as well. Call it the instinct that some land is already spoken for. A world this full, this large, this fearless, patrolled by cave lions and dire wolves and giants like Arctodus, did not feel empty at all. It felt owned, claimed, watched. And a scout standing alone at its edge feels that ownership deep in his gut, exactly the way Anu did, long before any scientist could ever explain it to him. That is the truer barrier, not one monster at a single gate, but a whole living continent that felt claimed, standing behind a wall of ice across an impossible distance. And there is something almost unbearably human in it, that what held us back at the end was not really the bear at all, but ice we could not melt, distance we could not shorten, and a deep animal caution whispering that this place already belonged to something else. Every barrier that mattered was larger than any single creature, and stranger and harder to fight, and we faced all of them at once. The real wonder is not that we waited so long at the door. The wonder is that in the end we went anyway, because eventually we did. Ice or no ice, giants or no giants, owned or not, humans crossed, and once they were through, they spread from one frozen edge of a hemisphere to the warm far tip of the other in what, against the depth of this story, was barely an eye blink. We stepped into a land that felt like it belonged to something far larger and older than ourselves, and slowly, over generations, we made it ours. Not by defeating the Guardian was already gone, but by doing the one thing our kind has always done best, walking toward the unknown anyway, carrying our fear with us, and refusing to let it be the thing that stops us. The bear did not guard the door forever because nothing could, and the legend of the beast at the gate is really the story of how badly a whole new world can frighten a brave one, and how in the end we walked straight through our fear. A whole hemisphere was waiting, something had seemed to guard it. And we crossed anyway into the empty, the unknown, the land that was never really ours to take, and took it the way we always have.